it has to be the city limits. Yeah, a little bit. I don't know.
So everybody knows I've gone live on YouTube.
Well, Davis.
It's just not live.
So you should start
What's
dancing.
this doing over here?
We still have a couple minutes, but
I don't know.
up to you. I just didn't want to forget this time.
I'm not seeing Karen.
Oh,
I'm not seeing Karen, right? And she's doing a
yeah.
presentation.
Yeah. It's supposed to be in person.
Making it pretty much easy.
So we're expecting her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the question.
I'm expecting her. Are we allowed to bring candy?
I think there's no like rules against candy.
I was
I
thinking
know.
about this big bag of candy. I should bring it.
I think there's, there's no rules against it.
Oh, Dan just made a face. We love big candy.
Likes candy.
We don't prohibit.
It's not prohibited.
Yeah.
What type of candy do you like?
I don't know. If you don't have candy here today, I don't know.
Okay.
I take my kids to his office to get like.
Oh, he's got like a bowl of candy.
I got a drawer.
I have a shelf of candy. Oh my god.
I have a drawer of candy. I have a drawer of candy and I have a box of cookies.
Yeah, my kids come by and say, oh, I guess I'm on the
So it was like one particular cookie that the HR director thought was one of the, four pieces.
Where do you get this? Like,
I ordered them off.
like a special.
They come out of the vending machine. But I never have a buck 50 in my pocket, so I just bought them for like a third of the price.
What type of cookie?
They're like little
Knots cookie.
knots cookies,
The berry.
little berry.
I
The HR daughter, her two daughters just love them. So every time they're there on Friday, they come and still cookies.
That's so awesome. Okay.
My daughter has a special person that comes to the office to get it.
It's like,
And then when it's empty, we have to bring it back to the office.
This, yeah, they're good. They're shortbread.
And when we wait for Karen for a few minutes.
I like it. I'm from there, so I like it. There's something at these meetings. She said that. Like some sort of special day.
No, that's not. Like we work together so many times, right?
That's-
Look at that. Finally, not big.
Hello. Normally with, but no.
Wait.
I was. I don't have any messages.
We can start and just stick on the agenda and then everybody else.
Okay, we're gonna call this meeting in order at 10:30. Verify there's a quorum.
When I call your name, please, let me know that you're here. Aaliyah Armstrong. Amanda Archer. Or anyone with Mendocino County Youth Project. Faith Dayton,
Present.
Jeanette Ornelas. I heard from her earlier today. She's planning on attending. She's coming from Fort Bragg, so she might be late. Joanne Brewer or Sage Wolf? Sage, here. I say the truth. Jeanette, I'm gonna mark you in. We just called your name. Okay. Vanna Olson. Judy Albert. Here. Kate Mather. Here. Paul Davis.
Here.
Chris Martinez.
Here.
Teresa D. Simone. Here. Dan McIntyre.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Cool. Is there any public comments? Did you receive any?
I received no advanced public comment. I do want to share that I did receive a request from a member of the public, from one of our COC general members to be able to attend on Zoom. I explained to them that we don't offer Zoom access to this meeting except to guest speakers or to board members in Brown Act allowable reasons. So we don't post it accessible to the public. That practice started when our board was a lot bigger and we had a lot of members who weren't coming in person and we couldn't meet to have a quorum. So I wanted the group to know, I got that request. And I'm just providing that update.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any approval of the August 19th, 2024 CUC board meeting minutes? Is there any corrections to those?
I'll move.
Thank you, Priest. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Judy. Roll call.
Just one moment, let me adjust this. Amanda is joined us. I'm going to change her to a yes. Thank you. You're very welcome. Welcome, glad to see you. So when I call your name, please say yes, no, or abstain to approving the minutes presented. Amanda Archer,
Yes.
Faith Gayton,
Abstain.
Jeanette Ornelas,
Yes.
Sage Wolf,
Yes.
Joanna Olson,
Yes.
Judy Albert,
Yes.
Kate Mather, Paul Davis,
Yes.
Priest Martinez,
Yes.
Teresa Di Simone.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay. Is there any announcements besides me? You're not seeing any? Okay, first of all, I want to say, I want to thank everybody. This will be my last meeting representing our CHDC. I'm leaving the organization. My last day there will be October 18th, but I will not make it to the October 21st meeting. Ashley will be taking over for me. Most of you probably are familiar with Ashley. She will be taking over for me, but since she's new, we will be resigning our chair seat effective the 19th technically. I promised Veronica that I would help her through her application reviews that come in the early part of October. I don't want to leave her hanging on that, so that's why I'm waiting until the 19th. So you guys, next meeting, we'll have to appoint a new vice chair to the board. I will be gone for a couple months and then I will be back. So
That's
not disappearing.
10/19, right?
And 19 years.
Making sure it's not this week.
No. You gotta put it with me for another 6 weeks, so.
When you say that, what does that mean?
I'll be the next executive director for NCO. So
Oh,
I'll be back-
Congratulations.
oh, congrats.
I'll be back on behalf of NCO or somebody from our
Great.
staff will be back, most likely. Okay,
Congratulations.
so be a little bit of delay in there, but I will be back. Until then, Ashley will be here for our CHDC with the same information that I can bring, so. Okay,
Dan, thank you for all your years of service.
Yeah.
CSC board.
well,
really
I
good.
appreciate it. I've learned a ton. And like I said, I don't plan on going away. Just there will be a transition period between actually starting at NCO and actually then being able to do something besides answer 60 million questions. And learn some more things. All right, we're gonna get down to reports and presentations. Karen Lovato.
Hi, so I'm Karen Lovato, Acting Deputy with Behavioral Health and Recovery Services. And you all invited me here today to talk about some of the changes coming in behavioral health and recovery services and behavioral health world in general around housing. The presentation is going to be kind of 30,000 foot view and very generalized because a lot of the details of the changes aren't fully known yet. So this is probably a little premature for some of the things that we know are coming. Because we just don't have a ton of detail about all of those pieces first. The sort of like three biggest things, and they all really are associated, or most of them are quite closely associated with the passing of Proposition 1 and Mental Health Services Act funding shifting a little bit. So the three main changes that are coming over the next couple of years are MHSA is changing. They keep going round and round about what they're going to call it, but for the most part, it's been called either Behavioral Health Services Act or Behavioral Health Transition. And that will, those changes go into effect in July of 2026. But of course, counties have a lot of work to do to prepare for those changes impacting. And some of the changes that are more immediately evident are that they have some funding that came from Prop 1 that is being reallocated towards bond funding. And that's the the BCHIP BHCIP bond funding that's going into round one. And those funds are, the applications for those funds are due in December of this year, and some additional pre-application requirements are due in October. So
Oh,
those
sorry, can I say, is the bond funding for construction of
It's
housing?
for launch-ready treatment programs. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Probably not in as much detail as you're looking for, but at least a little bit more detail than just the overview. And then the other project that's in changes now, that's just a slight change to how we're doing things currently, is behavioral health bridge housing funding, which Mendocino County Behavioral Health and Recovery Services applied for and was granted what's called a BHBH, which they abbreviate BB. I always say BHBH because BB means something else in my head. So the BHBH grant funding, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So the MHSA to BHSA changes, I don't know that many of you have a super intricate knowledge of MHSA unless you're a funding recipient, but it's shifting the funding. And we talked about this in a lot of MHSA stakeholder events. So those of you who are contractors with MHSA, you probably are overly familiar with this. But they're shifting the funding allocations from the way they were historically. In the past, about just under 80%, 79% of the funding from MHSA went into what's considered community services and supports, which was general system improvements in a variety of different categories for those with serious and chronic mental health conditions. And then just under 20%, 19% of funds were allocated to our prevention and early intervention funds, which were looking at 7 different categories of specific focused services to really either prevent the development of mental health conditions from developing at all, boost protective factors, to intervene early and prevent the severity of mental health diagnoses and symptoms from impacting people's functional abilities. And so that's really how the division of funds were set up. And then the remaining percentages, there's a small percent that went to the state and another small percent that was spent for innovation projects. The shift with Prop 1 and the moving into behavioral health services is that they're dividing that allocation of funding up a little bit differently. So now we will have 30% of the Mental Health Services Act funds or Behavioral Health Services Act funds that'll be dedicated to housing. 35% that'll be dedicated to full service partnerships. So historically, full service partnerships were a small component of CSS. Now it's its own entire component. And then the remaining 35% will be all the other things that we funded through MHSA. So it's definitely a big shift for us as far as the allocations of funds, that we're going to be prioritizing MHSA funds a lot higher towards the actual housing costs. The housing components, the 30% of the housing component, because I know that's what you all are most interested in, it can be used for similar to what the kinds of things we would use full service partnership, whatever it takes, supports for housings on, things like rental subsidies, operating subsidies, shared housing, family housing, the non-federal share for transitional rent, not that we have a lot of transitional housing programs, capital developments, and project-based housing assistance. One of the differences in the new shift to BHSA is that the housing component will not be limited to full service partnership participants. So there'll be the category of full service partnerships that are 35%. And just for those who don't know, full service partnerships are among the individuals who have what are considered serious and chronic mental health conditions, those who are most at risk within that group of folks, that population of folks, those who are at risk for sort of the higher levels of institutionalization, conservatorships and repeat incarcerations, things of that nature. So the 30% will really be focused on a variety of different housing supports, and then we'll have the 35% for full service partnerships, which goes to a number of different things, not just the whatever it takes component. There's some other specialty mental health costs associated with care that are covered for that. And then the remaining 35% again will be for all of the remainder of behavioral health services. So our prevention programs, our outreach and engagement programs, any workforce programs that we have, and then those innovation projects, if we're able to continue or sustain or look into new ones, those will have to come into what's now being called the behavioral health services and supports component for the remaining 35%. So that is a very fast nutshell on the MHSA changes. Before I shift gears into the other housing pieces, are there any questions about any of that? Yeah.
Could you just give, since you've been in this field as long as you have, are you pleased with the switching and the redirection of the funding as it's been done? Or would,
Put me on the spot here, Judy.
Or would you have preferred, it been left for some of the innovative and other kind of projects that would have maybe been done on a local level?
I'm a county employee, so I'm going to give you a very diplomatic response to that, because it's really not for me to make an opinion of whether or not it should or shouldn't now that it's passed. I have concerns that the programs that have been funded historically with both our CSS and our PEI are going to have to be a lot more competitive to qualify and to continue to be funded in 2026 and beyond, because there's just a much smaller pool of funding available for those programs. On the other side of the coin, I know that housing is just a huge need, and prioritization for finding better strategies to meet the housing needs of folks with serious and chronic behavioral health conditions, whether mental health or substance use, needs to be a priority. So I understand where the impetus came from, but I definitely have some concerns that the shift is going to mean some of the more flexible programs and funding sources will just probably not be sustainable as we move forward. And we don't know exactly what that looks like yet, because we're still getting a lot more clarity around what specific prohibitions will be, qualifications will be, and then what the available funding is once we sort our funds into these percentage categories.
Judy, I'll add a little bit to that. Being a provider for MHSA housing, I think it's a horrible change, simply because the fact is the state wants to push housing,
I know.
right? Which is great. But with that housing needs to come support services.
Yeah,
If they take the same funding source that they were supposed to provide support services and promised developers support services and got rid of the majority of it and said, we're gonna give you more for housing, that's great. But your turnover of clients is gonna continue to increase. And your developers that are gonna be willing to develop primary supportive housing is gonna continue to shrink because they continue to get stuck out in the cold. So I can give the unpolitically correct answer to that question.
No, I appreciate
It just
it.
is
And it is kind of
an asinine
interesting to me that it was put just to the general population to make that decision, who probably doesn't understand it on a more deep into.
Yeah, and it's
Receive services.
it's a complicated issue, and supportive services and mental health services have been underfunded for years, as well as housing. And when we're suffering budget shortfalls and the state wants to say we're doing something for housing, that's great. But you can't throw money just at housing if you don't provide the support services that go with that.
Right.
Because people will not sustain housing, especially when support services are already optional to start with. We're seeing damages in our units in some of the brand new complexes, upwards of $15,000 or $20,000 a unit every time somebody leaves.
Would have been nice if we got to keep the way it was and got more for housing.
Yeah.
I think that would have been
It would have been a
nicer
better
package.
approach.
I appreciate the honesty. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, the supportive services that are necessary for folks in this type of housing, does that come from the same budget as the housing, or does that take away from the innovative bucket as well?
So the housing component has some percentage that can be allocated to support services, but it's limited. It's not exactly it's not exactly the equivalent that we necessarily would see in something that was an entirely supported housing based program. So there's going to be some limitations to that. The housing component itself has to be divided up in that a maximum of 25% can be used for capital development of new projects. So there's a limit on how many new projects will actually come into place. There's a limit on only 50% can be used for those who are not going to meet the criteria of being considered chronically homeless. So there's going to be some limitations about who and how qualify. So that's gonna make some challenges, especially once folks become housed to the degree that they no longer meet the chronically homeless categorization. They won't qualify for this funding. And so I foresee over time, we're gonna hit some complicated decisions that we don't have answers to quite yet, and how we transition those folks into funding that's not through this, that doesn't have those same restrictions, that's still sustainable.
So we should talk about that because it depends on what definition of chronic homelessness they're using. If it's the HUD definition, people retain their chronically homeless status as long as they're in like a HUD or certain specific assisted program.
And I don't have the guidance yet from the state whether this is
Which
going
one
to
it
use
is.
the HUD definition or not, or whether they're gonna create their own, or whether they're gonna leave that ambiguous. I don't have that clarification yet. So that's why some of this is a little premature to
Okay,
get into the nitty gritty details on, but at least for the overview, those are some potential concerns I can see coming depending on how they move forward with some of those definitions.
so then my other question you might not know either yet, and is master leasing an eligible expense under this model?
I will need to, I actually don't know that off the top of my head. I know it is for one of the other programs that I'm gonna talk about. So I think there's a possibility that it is. I just don't know for sure on MHSA modernization yet.
Okay, cool.
I'm sorry, I know you're.
No, that's okay.
Just so we know, what is the ballpark annual allocation of HSA funds?
So it varies based on the number of millionaires, and some years it varies wildly. So I don't have the percentages. I didn't think anybody was going to ask me that. Otherwise, I could have brought the percentages for what Mendocino County gets. It ballparks 4 million a year for Mendocino County, but it can fluctuate wildly from like 2.26 or so there's pretty wild swings depending on the it's a calculation in regulation around the percentage of millionaires, and then each county gets a certain percentage, and then once we get our allocation, it's divided according to these
So
allocations.
somewhere between 2 and 6?
Okay. Yeah, depending on the number of millionaires for the year preceding or the year in which they make the calculations.
Any other questions on this? If not, we'll go on. You can go on to the next part, Karen.
All right. So the next part, the easy one to talk about, even though it's a little bit, I'm putting it in the middle of the two, even though they're really, the BCHIP and MHSA changes are both tied to Prop 1. But behavioral health bridge housing funding is one of the phases of grants associated with some of the increased COVID funds. And bridge funding is, it's going to be used very, very similarly to what we do for full service partnership housing. Basically, the expectations of the grant are very, very similar to full service partnership. The intent was that it was broadening the populations of folks that could access these types of funds. So it is bridge funding to help people who are homeless to access, to overcome the barriers that prevent them to getting into housing of any nature. So it will pay for rental deposits and back rent, kinds of challenges that are preventing somebody from going into longer term housing. It will pay for very, very short term periods of time, like a night or two at a shelter alternative if accessing the shelter is for some reason not an option, and just a handful of other types of short-term housing support to help people overcome barriers in accessing longer term housing. For the purposes of implementation, our bridge housing, because of all of the non-supplant rules that come with these types of grant fundings, you can't use it for something that's already funded in another way. For the most part, folks who qualify for this, they do have to have a behavioral health condition. And so for all intents and purposes for our county, the folks who will qualify for this are those who don't qualify for full service partnership, but also still have a serious and chronic mental health condition or a serious substance addiction problem. So we'll probably see more folks with substance addiction challenges, substance use and addiction challenges using the bridge funding than we will mental health folks, just because we already have a resource for those folks. So we're hoping to expand the accessibility and not supplant. So that is a program that we have already received. I'm working on finishing policies and procedures and getting approval to move forward with contracts with bell voucher vendors and our CHDC for rental negotiations and some other short-term options that might be available.
Could we set up some time when you get closer to knowing what's going on? Just, and I'd hate to see you recreate something that we already have, you know?
Yes,
So we should talk when you're ready.
absolutely. So then the V-chip bonds, also Prop 1, those are, so round 1 is for launch ready treatment. And this is probably the most time sensitive because the grant applications for those who are interested need to submit a, what did they call it? It is a, it's like a pre-application and it's not an intent to apply, but it's basically an intent to apply. So there's some deadlines in October and December for those who are interested, and the official deadline is in December to apply. But those who are, there's a pre-application due in October and a consultation requirement that has to be set up following the pre-application component.
And that's to the state, that's not a local.
It's not local. This is Department of Healthcare Services, BHCIP bond funds is where you find all this information.
Just pulled up the website.
There we go. It's behind.
And all links to the state programs are on your agenda.
But the nutshell from the fact sheet is basically what I brought for you today. It's about 3.3 million of, which is 75% of the total amount of bond funds that will be available. It needs to be for behavioral health treatment. It needs to be launch ready. It is competitive funding. This, it's divided up into 2 different components, county, city, tribal entity portion, which will be 1.5 billion, and a county, city, tribal, and either for or not for profit organizations component that is 1.8 billion. Of the total allocations, 30 million will be going to tribal entities. It is competitive, but they're aiming for geographic equity. So they are going to be looking at the locations of folks who are applying. They're also going to be looking at data on the need in making allocations, and all applicants, while it is not an application to the county, it's to the state. Applicants must have the support of the county behavioral health director. I think there's like a request for a letter of support or something along those lines from the behavioral health director.
Karen, do you know of any local organizations that are applying or projects or is the?
I am aware that there are local agencies that are interested in applying and have already reached out about that. I'm not going to go into who and where because I don't know that with any sense of definiteness at this point. But I do know there have been local entities that are interested in applying.
Can county governments apply?
County governments can apply.
We are not applying.
At this point, we are not intending to apply as a solo applicant. If there's a local entity that proposes something that's a joint, that's could still be under consideration, but we're not intending at this point to apply. Have until October to change our mind, but we're awfully darn close. So I know that that's likely. And then there will be an additional round, a round 2 of these BCHIP bond funds that will address unmet needs from round 1. And that will be the remainder of the 25% remainder from the bond funds. So I know that's super broad overview of that, but it is, again, most of the information's on the website at DHCS, and there is a lot of detail around that. They are really looking at launch ready though. There are some pretty specific list requirements for what they want for launch ready on those.
And treatment facilities means inpatient?
It doesn't have to mean inpatient. I wouldn't be surprised if that would be more competitive. I haven't read all of the application materials in detail because I know there's a shortage for inpatient, especially inpatient and residential. There's a shortage in the state. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's a competitive edge, but it's not a requirement that I'm aware of.
And for both mental health and substance use?
Yes, that is the
Maybe some double or some dual? Maybe.
Yes, hopefully some dual there. That is the biggest shift with all of this is that Prop 1 really expanded what few remaining limitations in Mental Health Services Act and the conversation around mental health services funds, it really broadened that back up to being behavioral health oriented and not having that line between behavioral health conditions and substance use. Any other questions about any of this that I may or may not be able to answer, or that I should bring back next time I come talk when I have more state guidance on some of the MHSA changes?
I'm sorry to go back to the original one again, but that shift of the 30%, 35, does that not actually go into effect until July 2026, or is that, I know you have to do planning ahead of time. but-
Yeah, we have to start planning well into effect. So the July 1st, 2026 is the fully effective date, but there are some prior milestones that we're gonna have to hit around RFP processes to make sure that we're allocating the funds correctly. So you're probably over the next year and a half, start hearing us doing some more, there's stakeholder communications that we have to do about what the changes are and how that's going to impact stakeholders. There's some slight definitions of broadening stakeholder inclusion criteria, in particular in larger counties. And so there's just some changes that we need to start communicating now. And then obviously the RFP process takes a long time. So we'll be doing those as early as we can realistically do for that 26-27 fiscal year.
So maybe this is, people already know this, but what's available in Mendocino County right now specifically for mental health clients in regards to housing?
So we have, well, certainly anything that's available to the general public, but we also have a handful of programs that are, many of them funded through MHSA already, or were at one point with their starting funding, their seed funding, were specific supported housing units or shared congregate housing type settings. So we have a handful of what I call supported housing units that have an expectation that housing comes with people showing up at your door and offering support systems, case management, et cetera. Client always has the right to say no. It's not mandated services, but they are supported wraparound. And when we're aware, because of either the congregate nature of the housing or the housing management communication, we may, if we know somebody's struggling, maybe at risk of losing housing because of behavioral health condition impacts, we may send crisis over to check on them. We may have a case management area. We tend to, when we can, when space allows, offer group and support type activities and other not necessarily specialty mental health treatment services, but in general wellness and pro-social rehabilitative supports on site.
And
when we can.
those programs won't be lost because of this change.
Those programs may be impacted. I don't know that we would lose any of those programs, but I really can't speak definitively until we get a good sense of what's our projected allocation for that year. How does that align with this? Fortunately, because of housing being a mandated requirement, most of those programs are going to fall into what's mandated. So it's a lot less likely that our support housing programs will be dramatically impacted or lost. But I'm going to be really careful not to say anything definitively until we actually know what are the RFP applications, what's aligning with the funding, because there's still a lot that's unknown, unfortunately. But yeah, they would definitely have a place within the new funding because they are supported housing. They are a housing component. There is a structural element that meets that appears to meet all of the criteria at this point in time.
Mhm.
Yeah. So they shouldn't be, and I don't want to say definitively that they absolutely.
But we still have to go through the competitive application process for our renewals anytime we need to renew.
Yep.
For the
Any
funding.
program will have to, yeah, exactly.
We're not just locked into a contract for all time.
Yeah, nothing's guaranteed infinity, but yes. Given everybody applies, if the funding remains relatively stable, supported housing programs have funding associated. So then it just becomes what's the competitiveness of the applicants and.
Do you know if, and again, this might be premature, but with the supportive services, are things like CalAIMS, like enhanced care management or other Medi-Cal billable expansion, or is that anything that can be brought in to support that, or is there like a moratorium on those working together?
Yes, it's not, I wouldn't say there's a moratorium, actually, the passing of CalAIM and some of the changes in specialty mental health billing, the expansion into ECM and CS, that is why the timing of the MHSA transition is shifting. The expectation among the legislature and sort of the decision makers who put this forward was that your community services support services are less needed to be funded through this funding stream because you have all of these expanded options and reduced restrictions under the CalAIM expansions. Now, I think we all know the reality is that these things take time to settle, to let the dust settle and figure out what's actually working and what's not. So it might, from our side, feel a little premature, but maybe by 2026 July, we'll have a better sense of whether it's actually doing that. We don't need as many of the community services supports, but the CSS and ECM, to my knowledge, aren't going to actually do what a lot of our PEI programs are doing. So that's really where the biggest concern lies, I think, from the transition perspective of existing services and what may or may not be able to continue after 2026.
So I have a question too, then, in regards to the challenges that many of these individuals face and the lack of housing because of that. And now listening to the $15,000 and $20,000 of repairs from those homes of the people that are already in, is there anything in this that allows for the expansion of homes that can give these people that have these multiple barriers more opportunities for housing, since they're already getting rid of their homeless encampments and everything else?
It's my understanding that a big motivator from the governor and the legislatures who drafted these transitions is that that's their hope, is that the 30% housing intervention component of the modernization to MHSA, the BHSA transition, is that it will force counties to prioritize the brick and mortar housing with the various different things that are allowable within that. It's, as Dan was mentioning, how much of an impact it ends up having to the supports that come with that, that we're just really unclear about, because it is, there's no question it will be reducing the allocations available for those kinds of services under MHSA. Now, if they're made up for in ECM and CS, then that's a whole different matter. But if they're not, then we will have a reduction in those support services.
But I think what you gotta understand too is, well, there might be covered under CalAIM. Those are not contractually obligated when we do construction. So when we do an MHSA project, the county obligates so much budget and so much funding and so much support for an extended period of time for that housing. When it gets away from that, the county can't commit that. We can't use what might be CalAIM supported funding as an application benefit. So you just took an application that would typically score higher and score it lower, so because there's not that match commitment for the county. We can't take into consideration that the tenants might get service provided under a different funding source that's not tied to MHSA. So that's the large hidden negative impact on this, because while it may make sense in the CalAIM MHSA world, it doesn't make sense in the funding sources we have to couple with that seed money to make housing. And it's not just us. It's Danco, it's PEP, it's anybody that's doing this. They're all facing the same challenge.
So with the damages, I mean, that threw me off a lot with the 15K for every time they come in and out. So, and if you already have supportive services and they're seeing that much damage on a regular basis, there's nothing to preclude that this won't continue to be a factor in rehabbing homes or anything else, because people are going to run out of money and people are going to get tired of renting to the same thing, and whoever is managing these facilities. So there's some big pieces here missing.
Yes, there is.
Well, I'm curious to see if, as the budget ends up, when you break down those percentages, since I know, at least in Mendocino County, we have a lot of MHSA programs that have been geared towards housing for people with serious mental illness. And I mean, I'm not involved at all, but I would imagine some of those programs that were funded under FSP or CSS are now going to be could potentially be funded under the housing percentage. And so how much of the housing percentage is going to be going towards already existing programs versus new startups? And it will be interesting to see, like, is there not that the existing programs are necessarily guaranteed, right? But in theory, if they were to continue, that new money, so is it really going to result in new builds
Mhm.
or new projects, new housing opportunities, rather than still supporting what we've already built in? And that's where I think, I mean, where when we were looking at Prop 1 going, this isn't actually, you're not adding resources to the community, you're just shifting taking from one resource to do another, or not even doing that when you already are using MHSA dollars for housing.
Yes, and in fact, there is, and I didn't emphasize this heavily because it doesn't have much to do with housing, there are some detractants from the passage of Prop 1 and some of the ramifications that there are slightly less amounts of funds coming to the counties because the proportion that's allocated at the state level is increasing. They're dividing it up in different ways that may ultimately come back to the county level, but we don't know what that is yet. The MHSA state percentage was 5% and it's 10% under BHSA, and it's going to be allocated to the state admin, which is what it had been before, and then a new state behavioral health workforce initiative and population-based prevention. And so those are some things that we're still learning about. What does that exactly mean? Does it or does it not come back? But yes, Sage is absolutely on point. Those are all discussions we're having internally at MHSA right now is if we were going to do a one-to-one comparison, what does that actually leave us with? Obviously, we'll be doing RFPs where everybody will be applying again. But if we were just to take today and to translate that into 2026, what would it actually look like? And what are we actually talking about with changes? And then to follow up on Dan's point, $5 million for our annual, $4 to $5 million for our annual rough allocation seems like a huge amount of money, but I think that's what our seed money was for the first big housing project that we did. So it's not a lot when you're talking about a project of that size and a minimum of 25 years, ideally 50 years expected duration. So it goes really quick.
Any other questions for?
I got one more. No Place Like Home and other programs have required coordinated entry or participation. Is there anything like that in this language? Do you know?
So I think that there definitely is coordinated entry expectations in Bridge. Yeah, we're absolutely coordinating with you all on HMIS and the Bridge overlap. Because there is a requirement for that. I think it's going to depend on what types of housing are built. But the general expectation is yes. So without being 100%, yes, there is an overall preference at the legislative level of being more coordinated across the systems of care. And you'll see that in the bond sheet. There's a lot of prioritizations for collaborative projects. So I don't know that it's necessarily mandated for all, but there is going to be sort of an encouragement to be collaborative in that.
And Brian, I get the most honestly, that is not enough to go to tax credits or get anything built. So anything that's coupled with it would require, right? Any other special needs or housing would be required. These coordinate entry or some systems similar to coordinate.
Just wondering what.
Especially if you want a homeless.
And one last question. I know that the state is allowing certain waivers for things and time extensions. It doesn't sound like Mendocino's needing to do any of that, but do you know?
You mean for the implementation of some of the, in general, we don't. If we think we can accomplish the change that's required without, because you have to go through a very formal process of request and permission. It has to go through the board before we can even propose it to the state and get board of supervisor approval. So for the most part, unless we absolutely must, we try to implement within the timeline that the state has set out. But yes, at this point, we're not requesting waivers for those things. Approval is not guaranteed. So it puts us in a bad position if we're hoping for an extension and then not granted one to not be prepared.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
Excellent presentation. Appreciate you coming.
We'll move on to jurisdiction updates. Megan,
Well, I feel like Karen did a lot of updating. I'm gonna let that count as the county minute, and I don't have anything to add. Things are fine.
Okay, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon Riley, Deputy City Manager. I don't think I have a lot to report, but at this Wednesday's council meeting, we will announce that through our Housing Trust Fund, we did a notice of funding availability. So we will be announcing that we'll be working with PEP again to do another project in Ukiah. We don't have any details or anything about it yet, but we hope to be able to look forward to another great affordable senior housing project in the not too distant future. You're probably aware that the Danko project on East Gobi at Village Circle is in the process of leasing up and filling those units. So that's good news. That's 71 units there. And then there's another project that's being built that is not strictly affordable housing, but headed up by the Pinoleville tribe along the rail trail accessed through Cleveland Lane, so near the PEP housing project. So housing is getting built slowly and not nearly enough, but it's getting built.
Thank you, Shannon. Any questions for Shannon? Okay, Jeanette?
I don't know if I have any housing updates for City of Fort Bragg. The city did go into agreement with Fort Bragg PD and FBUSD, so the city's cost sharing some of the costs to have a school resource officer. So they just started that this school year. He's connecting with youth at all schools, and they're doing a lot of like crime prevention, alcohol, substance use, interventions, educations. He's also connecting with youth that would build a trust to be able to talk to him. Some external referrals. I've given some for my program to kind of help some youth with substance use disorders. So hopefully that continues and they
A good program. Any questions for Jeanette? Okay, we'll go to the City of Willits.
Yeah, I haven't had any engagement from them. I have reached out several times. But I wanted to make sure that the COC was aware that the City of Willits is updating its land use element. And I provided the link to the website that they have hosted all of their documents. They've held 2 public hearings on the major changes. I went to the first hearing, and one of the things that I was struck by was this is the first major update since 1983. So since before I was born, when I was born. And so it's a major update, very thick packet of documents. One of the things that I felt was most important is they're expanding what they call spheres of influence, which is basically areas outside of the city limits that the city's kind of still responsible for like if there's city utilities out there, things like that. And so they're working on updating the code to be able to expand that and be able to offer more utilities. They do water and sewer to people living, in areas that aren't currently served. So I thought that was one of the most important pieces I saw. They're also expanding their residential housing. They're expanding where those places are zoned in the city, and so to encourage more housing development. And they're going to be hosting their final hearing to approve the final environmental impact report on October 23rd.
Thank you. We'll go to the standing committee reports, strategic planning. We need to have one.
Yeah. We need to have one. So, Veronica, let's talk about that. We do not have one. We don't have it. The strategic planning committee doesn't have anything like specific to do, but our strategic plan is actually kind of nearing the end of its 3 or 5 year cycle. I can't remember. So we actually probably need to decide as a strategic planning committee if we want to do a new plan or an update to the existing plan.
Okay. Shelters and solutions, Veronica.
We meet every other month, so we haven't met since our last update. Oh, wait,
No,
no, we did, wait, we met last week. Last week, that's what it was. Sorry, my brain's, that was last meeting. Okay, so we met last week and our next meeting is on November 13th at 1 p.m. We're working on updating our written standards for our emergency shelters, for the non-congregate shelter component that was assigned a while back to the committee. We're also looking at revising the rapid rehousing written standards to include guidance on how to implement landlord incentives. It's a new activity we hadn't implemented. Came up under ESGCV, and now that it's kind of a permanent thing, we need to incorporate it. Any other committees members want to add anything?
I'll add, our Front Door for Families program allows landlord incentives as well, and we're not doing it because we just couldn't figure out how to do it well. So I'll be really interested in if you are able to develop a landlord incentive policy, because I think it'll be for some other programs who haven't figured out exactly how to do that in a way that makes sense.
Suggestion, months ago with their COC, they allocated funding to assist landlords with renovating some of their units for some of their homeless tenants or unhoused tenants. And then they also provide additional funding. So just in case, like we mentioned, like Dan mentioned about the 15,000, if anything happens with the property, they give them additional funding on top of the deposit just to ensure that if there is any further damage, that they won't have to come out of pocket too much.
Teresa, will you speak a little bit to the HAP funded?
Sure. So with our landlord liaison, we offer landlord incentives, and one of those is mitigation funds for damages or unpaid rent that happen at the end of somebody's tenancy. So we can pay that through our landlord liaison program. It would have to be specifically for someone who, when they entered housing, they were chronically homeless. So we offer those types. We also offer security deposit assistance, application fee assistance, utility deposit assistance. We offer a landlord incentive of $1,000 if a landlord rents to somebody who is literally homeless. And what else do we have? I think those are most of the things that we offer through landlord incentives through CDC.
Or COC does have some landlord mitigation funding. So if we, assist somebody to move in and it blows up.
You know, the interesting thing is we have only paid one mitigation fund and probably since we got that funding. So it's mostly used for getting somebody into a unit. Hey, look, we also have these mitigation funds in case something happens when they move out and there's damages to the unit, but it's hardly ever used. So it's interesting.
Is it because of outreach issues? Because I know Home First, they did, I assisted them with their homelessness program when they did more of their outreach. And they did they would do these little, I guess, conferences or whatnot, or little events. And they would invite people out in the community. They'd provide food. It'd be like a total big thing. And then they would talk to landlords or even property managers and give them education, tell them about their rights and tell them about the program. And then a lot of them would start signing people up and they saw an increase.
Yeah, I mean, we do have our landlord liaison does a lot of outreach like that, but not on a level that you're talking about. She's very familiar with a lot of landlords in Mendocino County. So new landlord outreach though, we haven't done a lot of things like that, held events and things like that. So it is something to look into. But we don't have a whole ton of money for mitigation, right? So we'd rather spend it on like security deposit assistance and application fees and things like that. But you know, it's there. People need it.
Any other questions for Veronica? Move on to coordinating entry.
That's good. It's going really well. This committee is meeting quarterly with, work group meetings on the months in between. So the next meeting, is October 17th. We are working on building out what coordinated entry referrals to housing vacancies will look like. We've built out half of our coordinated entry system, which is getting people in, but we have to have a way to get them out as well. And that's what Nutmeg is really helping us to figure out how to do. One of the biggest needs that we have in this area is being able to build out what is relevant to us locally. So when we send a referral, when it's accepted, and the reasons why it might, you know, it's been screened and accepted, or reasons why they might not be eligible, or maybe they need some more information. And so we need to build out a list of what those potential, you know, status updates could look like. Because HUD doesn't want to define those for us. HUD wants us to be able to come up with what makes sense to us. And so we're kind of hitting a little bit of a brick wall with engagement with our care managers on what those those categories should be. And so if you're talking with your HMIS team at all, just encourage them to think about, you know, what does it look like whenever, you know, first you get them in, but then what happens with that person? What does that engagement look like? And so we can reflect it in the system. Always a lot going on here. They put out the training modules. Online training, thank you, Sage. Nutmeg Consulting, Paul Schmitz, he put together a series of videos that are now posted to a learning management system. So they're posted online. A person just creates a little username. Usually we try to keep it what their HMIS login is. They go on and it tracks which videos they've watched. And so that way we can get all of our current assessors up to date and train our new ones. At our last, and we have since worked, so the HMIS team, we have since worked with Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority and their team to start the process of establishing them as a front door. They're in our policies and procedures as such, but we don't advertise it because they're not quite ready. We've had that initial planning meeting. Once they've completed those videos, then we're going to have another sit-down session to design what it looks like so that they, you know, can incorporate it into what they're currently doing and helping support that. So we expand into another access location.
I'm hearing good feedback about the modules. I haven't had a chance to take them myself, but I'm hearing good feedback from our team at RCS that has been taking them, and they're really well put together and very helpful.
Great.
Glad to have that feedback.
Any questions for Veronica? The membership committee, I know you sent out a doodle, or did you send out a doodle poll, or when's the next meeting?
I did send out a doodle poll and I'm hoping to have, I need to check with Judy. Oh, that was the different meeting. That was the NOPA.
Sorry, I've got so many going. I have a doodle that it's actively working on scheduling the next meeting. And that's why there's not another meeting. It says next meeting on and I didn't finish it because we didn't get a schedule. Should I bring up the email I sent today? No, okay.
I know, right? I'll say it in a vague way. We're checking with board members who've missed a lot of meetings to make sure they.
Okay.
And so we'll be looking at members who haven't been in attendance at our next meeting. And we're also going to be creating our new member invitation, our annual invitation for new members at that next meeting.
I will say I noted with glee that 11 of our 12 board members were here today, which is really awesome. So thank you. It's but I know we went through a painstaking process of refiguring our board, but so far I feel like some of the outcomes we were hoping for are happening. So let's see it.
Okay, performance measure.
Let's see, our next meeting is Thursday, if anyone is interested in joining us. Principally, we just have to cover the data completeness report. We don't have a copy for it here. You can see the meeting or request, and I'll be more than happy to send it. But if you've ever sat through a meeting with me, you know that my answer is going to be, it looks great. We're not having any real problems with data completeness. People are following up and fixing the things that they need to fix. That's what we have.
Okay, any questions for Anna?
Did we reschedule the next meeting for this week? Did we reschedule the committee meeting? So we had the committee meeting last week.
Did we?
And we didn't have a quorum.
Oh, that's right.
Meet.
My bad.
So we won't be having another meeting until October, the second
Second
Thursday in October.
I'm a little time blind at times, so, you know.
Ad hoc committee, we are working on the few notices. Do you have any other thing to say other than we're just kind of in the process?
There's the link if you want to apply.
Yeah.
Do you have the, do you have enough members on the committees to
Yes.
make it useful? Okay.
Yes.
I want to thank
Fun.
Preet and Camille and Paul for reviewing the COC builds application with us. This is the first time we've done this, so it took Ron and I a little while to like understand how the process works. So I feel pretty good about the RFA package that's posted and hope that we get some applicants.
Any questions on that ad hoc stuff? Okay, we'll move on to project updates from Jeanette on the reentry collaborative.
At the reentry collaborative, we talked about finding solutions for 290 registrants. CDCR patrol has been coming to our meetings, and primarily I was asking questions because locally we have 290 registrant that's going to be chronically homeless because we have no resources for him. So he'll come in, check in every 30 days, but you really will see him downtown just pacing, and we're just trying to find some solutions. Or is that just what's going to happen when somebody paroles out of prison and they have the 290 status? So I didn't get him any answers.
Because no one had any good ideas.
No.
Yes.
So we were talking about it, and I didn't know if CDCR had funding or if there's any other additional resources that we could find. I was able to find an inpatient residential treatment facility that takes arsonists and 290s in Fairfield, but if he doesn't have a substance use disorder, can't have him go there. So I just didn't know what other agencies are doing or cities to help, and how we could be a little solution focused. I'll send them to you.
If he's interested, B2 is.
B2 will take 290s and arsonists.
Well, I'm sorry. Building Bridges Homeless Resource Center or emergency shelter. So we're having issues. I mean, we have to navigate some fun things. Sometimes we're trying to figure out how to best support the families that still come to the center and use, but it's just like a library if you're in a public space. And
yeah,
the person who has to register is responsible for following the terms of their registration, so. And we also help them try to figure out how to navigate that stuff when they're at the shelter. We don't get a whole lot of folks. It tends to be a little rough, like it's one of those things where as soon as the other people in the shelter start getting a clue that the person has to register, they can become a target and it isn't necessarily safe for them to be there, but we also support with that, like, you never know why someone has to register, and I mean, you can look and see like what their level is, stuff, but anyway,
That's awesome. So that just.
we're trying to,
Conversation.
it doesn't help necessarily with the housing element, but we will do housing navigation services with them if they are eligible and try to see what they can get connected to.
Can they stay in the shelter?
Yeah.
Um,
We don't check for arsonists. That hasn't been on our radar to like ask ever. But.
Arsonist is a barrier for
Housing.
vouchers and housing.
Yeah, so our programs, we allow people, even if they have to register, they just can't have the lifetime. You know, how there's
Yes.
different levels,
Like if it's
so
just
it just can't be the lifetime registry.
pretty sure.
So there's some people that are like 10 years or 5 years or some sort of less than lifetime.
And
Yeah.
it's all contingent on the years in which they were registered.
It just
Cause
changed.
yeah, they
It
changed the
just
law.
changed.
Used to be.
Years
right,
ago,
you
they
always
would
do that.
automatically do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
They did a lot.
They want to
Say
be
the
able to do
change
project based.
Yeah.
So one thing I've been curious.
If they weren't,
Process to.
well, that would be up to the landlord, right? That would be up to the property manager.
We help with it.
But like a voucher, when they go out and they find it, they could, as long as they're
Yeah.
not lifetime registrants, they would qualify. Arsonists, I don't think so, but we are looking at reducing our qualification criteria for criminal background as well.
Okay, well, right.
And the other problem you're gonna run into, and I know Lake County Probation Organization's trying to get this involved. Where there's little to no barrier for 290 arsonists. But we just had a large meeting with our insurance agents, so there's new questions insurance agents are asking, so that's gonna add another barrier. And two of the questions that came out of that meeting immediately were 290 registrants and arsonists, so. Where that's gonna end up at, I don't know, but that may add another quirk into housing those that are higher risk. Cause those that are housing them may not be able to house them even if they have no barriers for entry. It may be imposed by the insurance agency.
Also share, there's not a lot of participants that come and it's open to anybody to come to the reentry meetings. It's once a month. We do them via Zoom. They're great to collaborate with other agencies. With that, also have a veterans representative that goes, and he announced for Lake and Mendocino County veterans, they're having a veteran stand down. So it's more of like a resource fair for them. It's gonna be in Lake County, but they also talk about employment, housing options, housing navigation.
Is there any way to refer that person to like Sonoma County or San Jose?
It would be in terms of their parole and their probation officer or whoever's following their case, if they could transfer.
Okay, because there's several men, I guess I would say men designated housing units that accept 290s and arsonists as well. They have to just only stay in the men's population with those.
What if they're female?
If they're female, they have a separate female. They have them separate for the full housing first model that Home First does. They provide housing for 290s as well as arsonists. But they're like, I think there's 5 of the homes that have several that they assist with. And 2 of them are for males and 1 of them is for females with those types of registries. So you might want to reach out to them.
Thank you. I could share that back with them next month too.
Any other questions, for Jeanette? Thank you. There's no other program, there's protocols. We're gonna jump down to funding. We'll start with the NOFA for the COC program competitive.
So I included the links to the annual COC program competition, as well as the 2024 COC builds NOFO. So those links are in your agenda. And local applications for the COC program are due September 30th. And the COC builds local applications are due October 28th.
Any questions on those two funding sources? Now we'll move down to HF.
I received approval since the last meeting of our round 5 application. It is complete and accepted. We're waiting for the state to send us the standard agreement to start that contract and to receive the funds. As a follow-up to our discussion at our last meeting, Community Care Management Corporation still has not responded regarding our offer of funding. Risk Management informed me that they don't have anything that would preclude us from saying, I'm sorry, we haven't heard from you. We're gonna move on and do something else with it. And I have a request that's still in the queue with County Council. So once I hear back from County Council and get their input, then we can make a decision. The board can decide how it wants to proceed.
Any questions on HF?
Have the other contracts that were gonna get started? Like there was rapid rehousing that was gonna get launched, does that happen yet?
All of those.
Yeah, they all.
All of those contracts, except one, have been approved by the Board of Supervisors. No, wait, that's a HIP funded project. No, all of them are funded now. So all of them are in. There's so many of them. Sorry.
I think there's one left, the CDC, but their start date was with.
Oh, yes, yes. CDC, their current contract goes until the end of
This month.
yes.
Next year.
Next year,
No.
next year.
Yeah.
It's June 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna do an amendment to that contract.
No, it starts October 1st, 2024.
That's what it was. I was gonna.
I don't know.
I have a plan. I don't know what it is off the top of my head and I'd have to reference my
I think
notes.
it's
But I know that that's what it is. There's still unexpended funds on that contract. And so I was gonna do an extension through June 30th, 2025 to give CDC more time to spend the existing funds. And then
I think we've spent almost all of our funds.
you've only spent 100,000 of the 150.
In any case.
We've done a lot the last 2 months.
Okay, all of the contracts are done except for one that has a start date in the very near future.
Yes.
We're working on how to do that. It'll be either a current extension of the current one, or it'll be a new fresh contract. So we'll, we'll figure that part out.
Yes.
But the rest of the contracts that the review committee approved have all been awarded, with the exception of this community care one that did not materialize. So that was the entirety of HAP, all the way up to through HAP 4. The HAP 5 funds that Veronica just referenced, we haven't gotten the standard agreement with for yet, and so those are still kind of to be determined.
So we'll be doing another request for proposals for that round of funding.
And probably fold in HAP 6 too, but we have a little bit of time to figure that out.
Okay. Cash?
Funds have been fully expended and we are working on our final request for funds. And then we can close out the project.
Okay.
And I don't have any updates under ESG unless anyone has heard anything.
I just have crying complaints. What is happening with ESG? Does it exist? It's weird.
Remind me when that you're normally.
Okay, so normally we applied for 2023 ESG back in like August of 2023. We would have heard by February in typical years. We should have gotten our award letter in February. I've been harassing them and I'm still getting
nothing.
And when does the new, next year's?
So our current contract for ESG runs out at the end of October. And I have no idea, like usually it's seamless, like, cause we would have had the contracts for ESG always overlap each other. Because they run in like a 18-month cycle. And so like you have a year of, anyway, how it maps out, it still ends up being that you have the funding is for a year, but you have an 18-month spending window and they overlap them. But this year they're not doing that and they're not communicating with us about what they are doing. And they don't, and so then usually like the 2024 ESG NOFA should have come out in like May and we should have already done it. And here we are almost to October and no word on how. Anyway, it's really frustrating.
You talk to other grantees, like another.
The state just has said, like, they're doing some revisions to how they do the process. Anyway, but like in the meantime, our projects that have been existing, those are, it's very strange.
Just gonna get a notice saying we're extending until this date.
Yeah.
You know, that would be nice.
Like just, anyway, especially because like the rapid rehousing dollars that we're getting, they're non-competitive. They're like, it's an entitlement almost, like where the county is just, it should just come to our community. And this, I don't know what's happening. I will keep bugging them and bringing frustrations to y'all.
So, I've been meaning to ask Sage and Paul, did either one of you receive notice from HCD that they were revising their program guidelines?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't
That's what
see,
they're working on.
I didn't see it until.
They want to go from doing an every year NOFA to doing every 2 years, and instead of it being a one NOFA that goes through the COC, it would be more of a direct to the state.
Oh.
I don't know. It's too much that they're not communicating other than.
Not to make you feel any better, but if since ESG is now going to HCD, welcome to HCD because.
No, we've been doing with
It's
HCD
always
forever.
been.
I've been doing
I know,
with
but
HCD.
they're
I
no-
actually have loved them for ESG.
They're no,
But now they're,
been extended for years
I don't,
for other funding sources. So I think that's just trickling down into the rest of their programs, unfortunately.
it's just really frustrating. I'm like, we have rapid rehousing clients that we normally would just be able to roll into supporting with our next contract. And sorry, we can't pay your rent anymore at the end of October.
Yeah, I feel we
Sorry.
applied for some homework funds and we were supposed to know 4 months ago.
We had years where they forgot about us.
Literally forgot.
We had the year where they gave us of the extra money every.
Everything else me.
That could be.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, the next meeting will be October 21st, 2020 at 1:30.